Hi, everybody. It's Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with Fur Better, Fur Worse.
And Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
Hello, all. We are talking today with Dr. Jessica Hekman about the Functional Dog Collaborative. So let us know you're there. And this is an interesting topic and a I think I think it's where it all begins, right? With the dogs and the dogs we live with and the dogs we train. So, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Henkman, and she's going to talk about a little bit about her background and how this all started.
Yeah. So where should I start first? You want me to start with my background first and then
Yes,
talk
please.
about the FDC? Yeah. Well, I was a computer programmer when I graduated from college, and I got into dogs through rescue. I got my first dog as a rescue dog, and I started volunteering for rescue and started getting really interested about why do some dogs have behavior problems and some dogs don't have behavior problems? Like, what is different in the brain? And so then around 2005, I decided I wanted to go back to school to study that. And I was trying to figure out how best to do that. And at the time, it was very hard to find a research program that studied dog behavior. It's a lot easier now, but those programs didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
I was told I could study wolves or I could study rats, but I couldn't study dogs. So I ended up going to vet school thinking I would be a veterinary behaviorist. And I got into this program that was a dual DVM and then a master's program. So I took a year off in the middle to do this master's research. And I remember this one day in the middle of my master's year being like, I love research. This is the best. I want to do this. And so I decided after that I was going to go on to do a PhD program so I could go into research. But before I did that, I did a year of shelter medicine. So really passionate about shelters and population medicine, thinking about populations rather than individuals, which is still sort of the way I see the world. And then went and did the PhD studying these two populations of foxes, some bred to be very, very tame, another population bred to be very aggressive. The foxes are in Siberia. I was in Illinois. We didn't have those foxes in Illinois, but we studied genetic samples from them.
Oh,
Yeah, it was very cool. And so it was really interesting getting at. So I one way of describing my PhD is that it was the genetics of canid behavior. And then after that, I really wanted to finally get on to studying dogs. And so after that, I went to work at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard for my postdoc. And I got to work on the Darwin's Ark project, which some of you may have heard of. And that's studying behavior in companion dogs. So we were studying pet dogs, and owners would fill out surveys, and then we would get DNA samples. And that was fantastic. And while I was there, I had been basically saying no to starting something along the lines of the Functional Dog Collaborative for several years. But when COVID hit and I was stuck at home, I started failing to say no. So basically, all of that sort of studying and thinking about why is it that brains are different, right? Why are some animals one way and some animals another way? And the simple way of saying it, obviously it's genetics and environment, but the most important things are your genetics, meaning who your parents are, and your environment. The most important part of your environment for developing your personality and behavior is the very earliest part. So when you're in the uterus, when you're, in with the other puppies in the nest, and then how you're socialized before you go home, right? So when you're at the breeders. So all of that is stuff that breeders can do. And there's a lot of science about how we can do a better job at producing healthier dogs and more behaviorally resilient dogs. But there aren't really good social structures out there for encouraging people to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And a massive proportion of the dogs in the United States, at least, which is the system that I'm most familiar with since I live here, a massive proportion of the dogs that we produce here are not being produced by people who are doing all those things that we hope that they would do, right? Being really thoughtful about who gets bred to who, taking really good care of mom while she's pregnant, and I always sort of forget to say this because I think of it as obvious, but having good welfare for the parents, right? They should be pets too. Raising the puppies right, putting the puppies into homes that are going to be the right homes for them, being prepared to take the puppies back at any time. Like, we all talk about these components of being a really, really good breeder, but there's a teeny proportion of breeders who actually do that. The ones who do are fantastic, but there's a massive percentage of breeders are not doing those things. So what I really hoped that the Functional Dog Collaborative, the FDC, would be something bringing science and evidence to how we can breed dogs differently and better, and also how we can start connecting with people who maybe aren't doing such a good job and help them do a better job. So not having there be more breeders, because right now there's plenty of dogs, right? We don't actually have a dog shortage. We do have a shortage of dogs that are really thoughtfully bred and raised so that they fit into homes really well. So how can we start moving the needle so that we are producing more dogs that are going to fit into homes really well, not end up having to go to shelters, not being unhealthy, having full healthy lifespans. So that was why I felt that the FDC was something that needed to exist.
Okay. So yeah, that's really I would agree because I think all of us have gotten I've been like I said earlier, I was very fortunate to have gotten a few dogs from really two breeders that do a lot for the puppies. And yes, it's really nice to have a behaviorally sound dog and not have to worry about uh any things. But health is still, some of the ones that are health is still a big, you know, it's a big problem in certain breeds with the poor health, and they still keep breeding them, and they still have, these we're having, 5, 6, 7-year-old dogs just dying um from genetic type of, illnesses and all that. So what does the FDC do specifically? I know you have like a breeder program and a couple of other
Yeah.
programs and information.
So what we mostly do, there's what we do now and what we're building towards. So what we do now is we provide a lot of education. So there's probably best known as the podcast, which is me interviewing people. So it's a lot of me getting people to talk about things that are relevant to how we breed dogs, how we raise dogs, where dogs come from in general. We have a robust Facebook group, which is a place for people to come and have conversations about how we breed dogs, to ask questions, to help them become better breeders, but also to have sort of philosophical conversations. It's an interesting group because there's people from a lot of different parts of dogdom that aren't commonly in the same place and expected to be polite to each other. So it's an interesting group, but I feel like we've gotten to a place now where, for the most part, it is one of the politer groups on Facebook. We have an article library. So that is where we get people who are scientists or researchers go and read and digest scientific articles that are relevant to people who care about these topics, and they write summaries. So those summaries are on our website for people to read with links to the original articles, so that if reading the original article is a bit of a heavy lift for you, we provide a summary that says sort of, here's what it says, here are the takeaway points, here's what you can learn from it. And we have, in the last year, spun up 2 new social media feeds, one on Instagram and one on TikTok. And those are our attempt to reach out to people who maybe aren't, the population of people who come to our Facebook group tend to be dog nerds, people who are really, really passionate, a whole lot of dog trainers, a lot of dog breeders, and just a lot of people who are just interested in where dogs come from. And we're trying to reach out to people who are not necessarily dog nerds, people who love dogs but aren't going to go seeking out a group like
Right.
that. So that's
Right.
we're trying to push some information out onto Instagram and TikTok there. For the future, we do have currently 2 breeding cooperatives. So those are groups of breeders who have similar goals, who are working together to share information and share dogs for breeding. And so we're hoping to grow those, to have more of those with different goals, and putting so much of my time right now into putting together a platform for breeders to put their data into. The goal is to have more transparency, so that breeders can put a whole lot of health information in there, can provide incentives to help start pushing breeders in the direction of more health testing, better thinking about what the parents' behavior profiles are before breeding the dogs, all that kind of thing, and making it easier for people trying to find a dog to see all that information from the breeders to help them make their decisions. So, and that is very much in the future. We're on the precipice of it right now, but it hasn't been rolled out yet.
So your website, I'm sorry, the
go ahead.
website, I was just going to pop it in there.
Yes.
Functionalbreeding.org.
Yeah, functionalbreeding.org. Thank you. That would have been a really useful thing for me to say.
Yeah, I will.
There it is.
There it is. Got it. Perfect.
Tim is not going to have a problem finding the website now.
So I was just curious, because you said you do a lot of research and genetics and this and that. What is your viewpoint on Embark and the genetic markers that they're testing and providing in terms of assisting breeders in the simple, do I have something, do I not have something?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. And I'd be interested to hear what people who are listening, like what their perspectives are and what they would actually want to have answered there. Embark has one of the tests on the market that looks the most broadly across the DNA, and they answer a lot of questions on their panel about what genetic markers for specific diseases your dog has and which markers they don't have. It can be complex sometimes for someone to look at that and understand what it means. So, for example, we were talking before this started about dilated cardiomyopathy, DCM, heart disease. So, and I believe Embark does test for at least one of the markers currently, maybe both of them that have been found. And so that is a test where they can do a very good job of telling you whether your dog has the risk marker or not. But it's dependent on, what the marker is actually connected to. And it can be complex to understand how to use that the marker doesn't mean that your dog, if you had your dog test positive for both copies of both markers, you might come away from that thinking, well, my dog has DCM, I should go to the vet immediately. And that's not what that means. On the other hand, there's other diseases where if your dog has both copies of the risk version, then they probably do have the disease and you probably should go to the vet. So Embark does a great job, but interpreting those tests can be complicated. And unfortunately, most veterinarians out there today don't know a whole lot about how to interpret those tests. So I graduated from vet school in 2012. And I mean, those tests weren't even on the market then. So I received no training in how to interpret them. I received plenty of that training during my PhD, but most vets haven't done that. So that's one answer to your question, but feel free to ask others.
So let me ask you then. So let's say, because I've embarked my dogs that I've gotten from breeders. I guess the question I have is, like, if the dog has 2 copies or inherited 2 copies of a specific gene, but they're not showing any kind of, any kind of symptoms or anything like that. Because for specific breeds, like say, for example, IVDD, when the dog shows, and it's a breed that's not typically prone for that or looked on or tested for by the breeder or recommended by the genetic group, or the health group that oversees that breed. What is your take on that? I mean, it's a little confusing because it happened to me, and I was absolutely terrified, like super concerned, wanting to get ahead of it. What do I need to do? How do I need to prevent it? Stuff like that, And then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said to my dog, "Don't do it."
Mine did.
And he turned around and smiled at me and said, "I am an angel." But I may need to say "don't do it" to him again in a minute.
Totally can relate to that.
Yeah.
So what is your recommendation for people?
Yeah.
Like, because I went to my regular vet, and fortunately she has some information about it and stuff like that. And and then I'm going to a sports doctor, a sports rehab doctor, to be able to make sure that I'm doing things proactively to try and help my dog stay physically strong to prevent any of those issues.
Yeah.
Now, the average person, that being said, I don't know if they would do those things.
Right. As a side note, I am recording a podcast episode tomorrow about IVDD and genetic testing for IVDD, FYI. So those of you who are interested in that particularly, probably a month or less, it'll be coming out. So if your dog tests positive for something and you don't know what to do about it, certainly reaching out to your veterinarian is not the wrong thing, but it is definitely a good idea to make sure that you and your vet are clear what they know and what they don't know, and that they're comfortable telling you if they don't know. But all the genetic testing companies do or should have services where you can call and ask. I know that Embark does. I know that Mars does. I don't know what other company, there's a whole bunch of companies at this point, but the main ones definitely do, where you can call and say, my dog tested positive for this, and I want to know what it means.
Sure.
So that's where you're going to get the most useful answer, probably more reliably than with your veterinarian, unless your veterinarian has specific experience with that specific test, because it's just different based on what the test is, what the disease is, and then what your dog's breed is. So one of the things about the way the technology works for the panel that Embark does is they get you back, I forget how many it is it 200 or 300 answers to questions, but they're not all relevant to all breeds. In fact, for any given breed or mix, the markers that are relevant are going to be a subset, probably a pretty small subset. And so you're going to get a lot of stuff that's not relevant and where your dog might test positive for having one or two risk versions. And it might be really meaningless in your dog's breed. So always asking the company is the right place.
Cool.
So shifting just a smidge. I listen to a podcast, of course, about Dobermans because, can't say enough about how much of a genetic mess they are. I love mine, but I wish they weren't. And I know the Doberman Diversity Project, they collect a lot of DNA. American bred Dobermans, the farthest apart they are second cousins, which is gross. So, right, like how I know part of what you're doing or being careful to try and do, right, is approaching the topic of outcrossing. And at least I know with one of my breeds, that is the touchiest subject you could probably ever approach. So, can you, if we don't think Dobermans are Dobermans without cropped ears and a dock tail, you certainly aren't going to put a Beauceron back in there and make it a Doberman. Right. But anyway, right. So can you talk a little bit about outcrossing, what it is, what it can do for some of these breeds that are really genetically close together?
Yeah, it's people feel very strongly, and I get why too, because the history of breeds, of pure breeds, is a history of people defining something that they want, having this sort of joint breeding program to get it, and then being told that they can't keep going in that direction because the health problems have cropped up. So, so I'm trying to think how to approach it, not knowing necessarily the knowledge base of everybody who's listening, but it is the fact that as you breed more towards a particular type, so towards dogs who look like Dobermans, for example, that type, you're going to lose genetic diversity. You're going to do that in some ways intentionally, right? Well, we want them all to be black and tan. So that's intentional and it's not a bad thing. But as you're dropping candidates from breeding in order to fix certain parts of the type, you're losing other things as well. And then, of course, in addition to that, there's just the parts of dog breeding culture that we haven't realized until time has passed that are not the best for maintaining population health. And so that's stuff like popular sire effect, so that you have, one boy dog who's really special in some way. He's a grand champion, or he wins all the sports titles, or whatever it is for the particular population that you're in. And because boys can have lots and lots of babies, it's very easy for him to sire most of the puppies for the next generation. And then in the next generation, suddenly everybody's all related to each other, right? Because you don't have one person saying who can breed to who. You have everybody making the same decision, given the same inputs. And, that over time becomes problematic. We have had an approach, sort of the conventional wisdom has been, you take a litter of puppies and you hold back one or two for breeding, the best one or two for breeding, and the rest of them don't get to reproduce. They get spayed or neutered and placed as pets. But that, again, we're losing genes, or we're losing variations in genes every generation if we do that. And to be clear, I'm not in that case advocating for breeding dogs that aren't nice dogs. I think it is important to remove dogs from the breeding population who are not healthy, who are not behaviorally what we want to see. But when you see, sort of, well, there's 8 dogs and we keep 2, and, maybe 3 or 4 of the others would be breeding candidates. But, one of my favorite pet examples, there's just a little bit too much white, and so it wouldn't place in the show ring, but would be a really good pet. Why would we not breed that dog? And so those sorts of practices have led to the gene pools contracting. And then we start seeing some of these really terrifying situations where we see breeds where the life expectancy is just 6 to 8 years. We see breeds where we expect 60% of them to have one particular disease, heart disease, cancer. Anytime you can say, well, that breed, I know that there's a very high risk that it's going to have X, Y, or Z disease. That's when you know that there's some genetic correlation. And we aren't always able to test for those things, right? We can't easily do genetic tests that tell us definitely for sure about heart disease, cancer, epilepsy. Then there's the various behavioral issues like sound sensitivity, separation anxiety. Those all have genetic parts as well. So what do you do, particularly when you really have gotten into a corner and you have this population that is, doesn't have the lifespan that we'd like to see, or has some, painful disease that affects the dog's welfare, that it's very likely that many of the dogs will have that disease? What can you do? So, and this is where I talked about how what we do culturally is different from what the recommendation is for the research. So we know that bringing in more diversity of genetics is going to decrease basically the concentration of the versions of the genes that are providing those, that are increasing the risk of those problems. And I can talk as well. I don't know if there's people here who have questions about whether, we would worry about bringing in new diseases. I'm certainly happy to talk about that, but I don't want to go down that rat hole right now unless there are people here who do want to talk about it, because I want to stay on track. So it's really hard socially when you've been breeding for a long time to have dogs that look and act a particular way to be told, well, you're not going to be able to improve their health by using the tools that you've used, which have been, measuring the health of the dogs, picking the best dogs and breeding them. That's not going to work anymore when you are in the corner with some of these breeds. And you're
Yes,
going to have
right.
to start bringing in fresh genetics in order to get out of that corner. But when you bring in the fresh genetics, you are going to lose some of that type, right? The first few generations are not going to look like Dobermans anymore. And if you breed right back, right? So then sometimes people are like, well, I could just, I can cross in one dog and then I'll just start breeding back to Dobermans or Goldens or whatever it is. And by the third generation, they will look very much like the purebred again. But you will also have bred out all of that diversity that you brought in. And so there needs to be a way of continually injecting diversity, of us changing this whole approach. The approach that I recommend, because I think it's clear to everybody that the breed clubs are not going to say, oh, let's start outcrossing regularly. That's clearly not on the table. So the approach that I recommend is that we have what I would refer to as a side population. So my first dog was a Golden. I love Goldens. I think they're fabulous. I don't want to have another one because I don't like the risk of cancer. And I know there's a lot of people out there who like Goldens as pets, and they don't really need the dog to be that yellow color. They don't really need to be the dog to be that size. They don't mind if it's a mixed breed, right? So start breeding the population of dogs that are Golden-like, but are not purebred. And that's the population for the people who want that type of dog. Allow the people who really want to keep breeding within the closed stud book. They keep breeding the way they want to breed. If they come to a point where they want to outcross, they have this population right there that is very similar to their population, but has increased genetic diversity that they can dip into if they want to. But no one's making them do it. My feeling is that this should satisfy everybody, but it of course does not.
No.
There's just a lot of feeling of even that is unacceptable, but that's the solution I'm advocating.
So, Dr. Heckman, about that, so let's say that comes to pass, we have this nice group of like Golden Lake or whatever that are great for pet homes, but the problem is if they're mixed breeds or whatever, they're spaying and neutering of them, which is a problem because a lot of times I think we're spaying and neutering really nice dogs that could make great pets, and they're spayed and neutered, and there's not much we can do about that. So, that's another, I think, shift that needs to also happen, kind of, right? Because I think we're spaying and neutering way too many nice dogs. I understand a lot of the rationale behind it, but and from a shelter perspective, I totally get it. But spaying and neutering hasn't really diminished our dog population and our dog overpopulation problem.
Well,
So
I disagree with that. I'd say that spaying and neutering has. So and I don't know how many people know how much it's changed, but there's some pretty impressive data showing that, if you go back to the 1970s, we were euthanizing for space about 20 million dogs a year. And if you look today, it's less than 1 million. And a lot of that is because of spay and neuter. So, but I think that we have successfully had that cultural shift, and now maybe we're going too far. So I am agreeing with you, Nancy.
yeah.
Not that spay and neuter hasn't been useful, because I think it has. And I like that people who don't intend to thoughtfully breed their dogs, that the default is,
Sure.
if it's not someone who's going to do a good job of keeping their dog in their yard or managing their
Sure.
dog, wouldn't do a good job of raising the puppies, wouldn't do might take the puppies to a shelter, then I'm thrilled that they would have a spayed or neutered dog. But we also have this population of dog nerds right now who can do a very good job of managing to keep their dog from getting knocked up or knocking someone up, and who also could theoretically participate in a breeding program and perhaps do a better job of that. Again, when I talk about increasing the percentage of breeders who are doing a really good job, I would like to see that kind of person breeding rather than, say, the people who have 100 dogs on property, keep them in kennels, and provide the puppies
Yeah.
to pet stores, right? That's the kind of breeder that I would like to see replaced with people who are breeding dogs in homes.
Yeah. No, I agree because because I have right now I have um my male dogs are intact for right now. They're nice
Mhm.
dogs. Yeah, you're right. They're not going to run around breeding because they're not. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm not gonna. I'm not really planning on breeding them. I'm keeping them intact a little longer, just as a health thing.
Mhm.
Just so that because I have a shepherd, so he's trying to keep them as healthy as possible. But yeah, I think we're because that's the other. I mean, we're spaying and neutering really, really young dogs. You know what I mean, and just every dog. So I agree. Like certain dogs, depending on where they're going and what the home is, they should be spayed and neutered. But not every. There are, like you said, a big population of people that can keep those dogs, like you said, safe and not going around, having puppies. They're just gonna
Yeah,
especially the dog nerds, dog sport nerds, they do keep
right,
most of us keep our dogs intact if it's possible, right? If it's
right,
there's no reason to spay or neuter, and for me, if the dog's behaviorally sound and physically sound, and and you just got to keep an eye on for the other health issues as they get older. But
yeah, for sure.
I kind of
So
plan on. Go ahead.
I have a question. You had talked about social structure and how it's not something that, you talked about that particular piece. Can you expand on that in terms of what you're,
Yeah. So people who are breeding in, I don't even, there's not a good term for it. So let's say sort of the conventional, what we have over the last couple decades come to think of as the really good breeders, are breeding purebred dogs, and they're breeding them um, generally under the recommendations of or under the umbrella of a breed club. And the breed club provides a lot of really useful social structure, right? It provides guidelines for how to breed, but it also provides, the specialty show that you go to and you hang out with other people who are breeding dogs of the same breed, and you make friends and you have this whole community that you're part of. And so if I were to go to someone who's part of the Golden Retriever breed club, and I were to say, hey, why don't you start breeding some outcross puppies?
sorry,
Why don't you start outcrossing? I think a very reasonable explanation, and one that I would be likely to get, would be, I might be interested in doing that, but my breed club has a code of ethics that says that if I do that, I will be removed from the breed club. And
Yeah.
moreover, and that anybody who notices that I'm doing it should report me to the breed club. And even if that didn't happen, I'd be ostracized. Like, this is my social group. These people are important to me, and I'd be ostracized, and I'd never get good breeding stock again. Like, it's, I've seen this happen to people who've decided to go the outcrossing route, and it's not fun for them. And so one of the things I was thinking as we were building the FTC was, well, what are the things that a breed club provides, and can we start providing that to people who want to do a good job of breeding but don't have a breed club? Um, and and I was thinking particularly of people like my friend Laura Sharkey, who with her wife, runs the Bosun Dog Project. So they are breeding dogs solely for health and behavior. They don't have really strong goals about what the dogs look like. So they're mixing a variety of different breeds together in order to get dogs who make really good pets. And where does their social structure come from? How do they find breeding stock? How do they find people to talk to about what their goals are, and talk to about how to make difficult decisions, like, oh, this dog came back with a test that's, kind of borderline. The dog's great otherwise. Is it safe to breed the dog? Who do they talk to about things like that? So how do we put together social structures for people like that? And that's one of the things I was hoping to provide with the FDC.
Yeah, well, because it's true. Because you're right. If they're not breeding the way with per the breed club, it does become it can get pretty rough for those folks that decide they want to. So, uh, kind of switching a little bit, because there was an article on Facebook that somebody commented on or whatever, um, and and you see it too with all the different doodles that are being bred. Some of them are very nice, but again, that too is being, because we've gotten quite a lot of doodles with not such great, with a lot of behavior issues and
Yep.
problems. So, which obviously they weren't really carefully bred, but for some of these people that are selling, I mean, and we see that they're selling mixed breeds doodles of whatever, burner doodle or whatever, for a lot of money, $4 or $5,000, and the general public are paying for it, and they're paying it, they don't even question it. And then the thing is, it's like they're not all, they're not really bred well, or they're just kind of following the same guidelines that other breed clubs do
Mm-hmm.
in some cases. So how do you, you know, uh, you know, because you definitely want to put out those great dogs, those great family pet dogs, but people always just look at it as a quick way to make a buck,
Yeah,
making
for sure. So in my opinion, it's not about whether a dog is mixed breed or purebred. It's about whether the breeder is doing a good job.
Yep.
And for sure, what we're seeing right now is that doodles are incredibly popular.
Yeah.
I think, we tend to get lists of like, what's the most popular breed right now? I think doodles are probably, I mean, there's no question, doodles are more popular than the most popular breed. They're
Yes.
incredibly
No question.
popular. And what happens when a breed or a mix is very popular is people who are in it just for money, that's where they're going to go, because that's where the money is. And so there's no question that if you look at people who are breeding doodles, there's a larger percentage of people doing a really crappy job of it compared to, say, like, I have an English Shepherd. So I'd say the people breeding English Shepherds, there tend to be very few in it for the money, because there's not a lot of money to be made there.
Right.
And so that's not anything about the mix in particular, except for its popularity, right? I think, in fact, there's a lot of reason to say that a lot of those mixes are pretty nice mixes. It's just that the people who are producing them are doing such a bad job. There are doodle breeders out there who are doing a fantastic job. It
Mhm.
can be really hard for people to find them through
Yes.
the mess of all the ones who are not doing such a fantastic job. So, what frustrates me is when I hear people saying that it's not possible to breed a doodle ethically. And when you start sort of taking that apart, they'll say, one common thing is to say, because you can't breed a mixed breed dog ethically, which I think we've already talked about, but I could probably talk about that more. Because the Golden Retriever Club of America and the Poodle Club of America both state in their code of ethics that they don't allow crossing, that therefore it's unethical to cross the two. To which my answer is there are plenty of dogs that their owners are not associated with those clubs. There are plenty of
Right.
purebreds. Right. But anyways, so it frustrates me when people say that the mix is a bad mix. There's a lot of breeders doing a bad job of producing the mix, but I mean, we can look back before there were doodles at breeds where there were a lot of people in that breed doing a crappy job who are in it
Yep.
just for money. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
hope,
it's
does that
true.
answer your question? Yeah.
Yep, it does. Well, it's just that's where it gets, like you said, that's where people go because the money's there, and people are, uh, you know, are not breeding. They're not doing health testing. They're not doing all that stuff. Because I think if you're going to pay X number of dollars, that ideally that breeder is doing a lot of health testing so that
Yeah.
way you know what you're getting. But these, they don't. They just,
Right.
they have a bunch of puppies and they sell them for this and there's none of them are, they're not health tested, they're not,
Right.
and some of them can be behaviorally, now you know obviously as the more popular they get, the more behavior problems come up, right? Because we
Right.
used to get a doodle here and there with a behavior problem. And now we're getting a lots and lots of them, and a lot of them are when they're puppies, very young puppies.
Yeah.
Um,
I also
so
think
you
we
can
see
tell that
that
the
in,
genetics is at play, huh?
don't we also see that in a variety of breeds, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the
Oh,
German
Yep.
Shepherd,
totally,
for example, I
totally.
Aussies.
mean, Aussies,
Aussies,
oh yeah, Border Collies, Sound
Yeah.
Sensitive, the
Yep.
whole thing. And these breeders are still breeding, but I think it all goes back to ethical breeding, right?
Yeah.
Doing what you're supposed to do and not trying to dump the dogs at 6 7 weeks old when they're not necessarily ready to handle what their future lives will be like. And I mean, and the other thing, I have a friend of mine who purchased a puppy. She's 8 months old, and the breeder said she, talked a good game, but that was about it.
Mm.
And once you put your deposit down, that's that, right? So she went with it, and then there's some structural concerns in regards to the dog. So it's terrible, and the breeder's like, I've been doing this for so long, et cetera, whatever. I guess it brings up, and I was just I had mentioned to Joanne, like, what should people look for in a good breeder? What should they be doing? What should they be testing for?
Mhm.
Whether, there's puppy culture, there's all these different things out there in terms of how to raise a puppy and so forth. Because I think that's sorely missing in the public's eye. Like, they think these puppies are um, blank slates, and they're not.
And
No, they're not. Yeah, so I guess I would say starting at the beginning, trying to know as much as you can about the puppy's parents. Are the puppy's parents the kind of dog you would want to have in your home? Are they doing well in an environment that's similar to your environment? Um, so if
mm,
they're doing well on a farm, that doesn't mean they're going to do well in an urban environment.
right.
It doesn't necessarily mean you can't get a puppy from someone who's raising them on a farm, because obviously that's a great place to raise puppies. But in that case, you can ask, have you successfully placed puppies in the city before? And can I talk to some of those people to see how they're doing? Right. So just some evidence that puppies, that the parents or previous puppies from these lines do well in the environment that you're in and doing the kinds of things that you want them to do. Right. Do you want it to be able to go to the farmer's market with you? Stuff like that. So just exploring whether the genetics are there for that. And then how is the puppy socialized, right? And it doesn't, so for me, puppy culture or avid dog, those are sort of easy ways of saying that the breeder is making a solid effort.
Mm,
It's very easy to say, I use puppy culture, and then you sort of know what they're doing. And I like puppy culture as a program. If the breeder doesn't use that, but sort of rolls their own, then you have to ask them a few more questions. But the thing to look for is that the puppies are getting a variety of experiences, but that they're not being pushed too hard, right? That the breeder seems to have some understanding of dog body language and some sympathy, some empathy to what the puppy's experiencing, and isn't going to say, well, they need to go meet horses. And if they're terrified, they just I need to keep pushing them until they deal with it. But an understanding of sort of a gentle socialization where the dog's reactions are taken into account. The breeder should be very thoughtful about where they place the puppies. So they should be asking you questions about what your knowledge is of dogs, what your expectations are, how much you're going to exercise them, whether this is the right breed for you, whether these are the right puppies for you. And then health testing is hard because it's different for every breed or mix. It would be rare for there to be no reason to do any health testing. I think pretty much any cross, the parents should be health tested in some way. What the actual health tests are, certainly going to the breed club, or going to OFA, the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals, and looking at the CHIC guidelines for that breed. They only have those for individual breeds, not for crosses, but you can go look at, Goldens and Poodles and suspect that the intersection, the complete set of those should be what a Golden Doodle breeder should be doing. And then if the breeder decided that one of those tests wasn't relevant for their lines, then talk to them about why. And if you don't understand what they have to say, then you could go to your veterinarian and talk to them. You could try to find someone with more knowledge than you have about that breed to talk to, but that again can be complicated to,
Yes.
there's not a certificate to say that this is someone that you should trust. But those are the general guidelines that I would suggest. If you're just starting out in dogs and this is your first dog, finding a friend who knows more than you do and having them help show you the ropes can be useful. And I know that a lot of dog trainers are willing to help people find dogs.
Yes, please.
You should pay dog trainers to do this, but I think a lot of dog trainers are super thrilled, and it's rare for people to try to do that, but it's a really good idea.
And how do you feel about making sure breeders get litters assessed so you get other eyes on them other than ones who've seen them together for 8 weeks?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea. I think a lot of people put a lot of stock in puppy testing and assume that what the tester sees is going to be true for the life of the puppy. And they're so changeable at that age, right? So I think it's really useful to have someone give that insight. Because as you say, Joanne, is someone who hasn't been living with them. But it's also useful to compare that to what the breeder has seen over the last 8 weeks, because they also know the puppy really well. So sort of those two things together, and then with an understanding of, the dog that is the most, here's an example. My dog Dash, who I just told not to do that at the door, and he was so good about it. He was, as a puppy, the only puppy to figure out the dog door, which I loved. I thought that sounded like just the dog for me. He will not now use the dog door in my house because it touches his body. So there just can be surprising changes.
Yeah. So can I ask, like, how does some of the genetic stuff help with the structure of the dog, the physical structure? Because I know sometimes you can have, a lovely behaviorally sound dog that has some, that looks like they were put together with spare parts, and they have, they'll have problems or whatever. Not that can happen for any breed, but some, like I have Shepherd. Luckily, he's very structurally sound, and my other one was too. But that's not usually the norm. Usually, they tend to have problems with their hips and problems with all the, with all the other.
Is your I'm not sure exactly what your question is. There's a lot that I could say about structure, but is your question
how are you? So when your program, they assess the behavior of the dog, but also the structure of the dog. If your two people are thinking of breeding, you want them to be functionally sound. I mean, physically
structurally sound. Yeah, no, of course. Right. So I didn't talk about structure. Yes, structure is important. If a dog is put together poorly, it can lead to problems down the line. It can be challenging to figure out how to get the dog assessed if you're not going to conformation shows. On the other hand, if you are going to conformation shows, sometimes it's not the goal of what the judge awards points to is not always the healthy structure. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, depending on the breed. So how do you know that, in a lot of cases, breeders have just educated themselves. They're really good at looking at a stack and saying this dog is structurally sound. That dog, this dog's a little weak in that area. I'm going to breed it to a dog who's really strong in that area.
Yeah.
And it's hard for someone who's seeking out structurally sound puppies to, you sort of, in a lot of cases, you'd be asking the breeder, and the breeder would say something like, oh, yes, I assess blah, blah, blah. And do you trust them? Or, oh, but the parents are both grand champions. But in this breed, what exactly does that mean?
Right.
So, I think for me, a good way of going at it, as you're interviewing breeders to try to figure out whether the dog is going to remain structurally sound late into life, is focusing less on asking about the parent structure, which you have the opportunity to hopefully to ask. So dogs in your lines, how are they when they're old? At what point do they start having arthritis? Do you see hip problems early on? And I think that it can be useful to say, what kinds of problems do you see in your lines? Being aware that that's a very sensitive question, and that a lot of breeders have been trained by social media that if they answer that question with true transparency, they'll be punished. So as dog trainers, we know that that inhibits the behavior and makes them a lot less likely to be transparent. So ideally, that's a question you'd be able to ask someone. In practice, I do caution people to be very gentle about how they ask that question.
Yes.
And recognize that people, breeders are pouring their heart and their soul into how they're breeding these dogs. They're trying very hard to produce really healthy puppies. It's the type of breeder that we're talking about, trying really hard to produce really healthy puppies. And, talking about how life happens, biology happens, and it's not perfect is going to be hard for them. So just being aware of that.
Yeah. Well,
Kimberly
and that's
suggests looking at longevity, and that's another great question. Like asking how long do dogs in your lines tend to live? Remembering that longevity, lifespan is not the same thing as health span. So if they get arthritis at age 10 and then they live to 15, you still want to know about the arthritis, not just living to 15. But longevity is another great question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would agree, because that's and I've been, again, really lucky. The two breeders I've got dogs from, they're very honest about, well, we had this one dog had this, one dog had that, and it's easy. It's nice to be able to know that, so you can make that educated decision. It's like, okay, if that's all you've had, or this is the only problem you've had, then okay, it's okay.
I didn't say this, but I should have. One of the criteria could be finding someone that you feel comfortable with as the breeder, so that you are able to have a relationship with them long term. Not that you're going to be hassling them all the time, but that you're comfortable going to them and saying, "I've had this problem. Can you help?"
Yeah.
Right. Someone that you're comfortable interacting with.
Right.
Well, and that's going to be honest with you, right? I've had both wonderful people and other people who are like, we've never had a temperament problem in our lines.
Right.
Come to find out, you've had euthanasias for temperament in your lines. So
and I think particularly so. One thing is, if you were to go to someone about a border collie and they were to say, none of the dogs on either side have ever had seizures, you might have reason to suspect that they were either lying to you or that someone was lying to them. Right.
Yes.
And so there's you can say that for any breed, right? Golden retrievers and cancer. I don't want to pick out a particular breed, but if there's something that you're worried about because it's really common in the breed, and you go to a breeder and they say, absolutely not, it never happens in these lines, take that with a grain of salt. They may not be lying, but they may not know, because other people may be lying. So
yes, right, because they didn't know, or they weren't.
They may not have been told.
Yeah. And
yes,
we do a lot of assessments, or I do a lot of, we all three of us do assessments for litters, and it's interesting because we assess. I'm not really one to try to assess structure too much, because I don't feel I'm qualified enough to be able to do that. But on behavior and that or temperament I feel more comfortable doing, but structure is where I could see something that's pretty dramatic and drastic that's wrong, but I can't see some of the subtleties. um and in many cases it doesn't matter. And and this is the problem, right? Some of the the temperament assessment is an assessment. It's not that the puppy's good or bad. It's just, this is who your
Yeah.
puppy is, and this is what, these are some of the things you might have to do as it matures. But people get, the breeders get very sensitive about that when you assess
Mhm.
their litters and say, this is the kind of home this dog should go to. It's like, well, I have performance homes waiting for it. I go, well,
Mhm.
this dog isn't going to do that. So,
Yeah.
and I've only had a handful of breeders that have been like, okay, and they put them in a home
Mhm.
they belong. Um, and you try to be as gentle as possible, because I understand they're very, it's a
Mhm.
sensitive thing. They've raised these puppies. They work so hard.
Yeah.
Um, so, trying to get people to be okay. And a lot of breeders don't get their puppies assessed, by, because and it may not be a good or bad, a right or wrong answer. It's just getting somebody else's eyes on you that maybe
Mhm.
can give you some guidance of where to place those dogs so that they can have the best life possible, and you don't get them back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's the ideal.
If you had your little punch list, green, blue sky thinking, everyone's listening to you, you have the world stage. What would be like your top 10 list of like, I wish every responsible, ethical breeder did these things? You only get
Just
10.
Um,
10.
No, I'm kidding.
Just 10 things.
just 10 parent dogs living in a house mainly,
Ah,
not spending most of their life in a kennel. They can be in the
Okay.
kennel sometimes, but they should have a relationship with a human. They should have a life, right?
Yes.
Um,
wow. I'm just saying wow because,
You have to say it out loud.
you have to
yeah.
say it. I kept forgetting to say it, and people would get mad at me and be like, "Don't you care about the parent dogs?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I thought it was so obvious." So I'm more careful to start there now. Obviously, um, doing the health testing. We can even make that two separate points. Doing the health testing, and then paying attention to the results and making thoughtful decisions based on the results, right? So you see a lot of times these dogs are fully health tested. Did they pass the tests? What did you do based on the tests, right? And they're not always pass fail tests. So
Right.
it's not right, and it can be complicated, like with, oh, this one's borderline. Should I remove the dog from the breeding program? But then, particularly if you're breeding in a situation where you have a population with not great genetic diversity, you're losing genetic diversity. If so, like, how do you balance all of that? What's more important? How much of a risk of arthritis versus, oh my God, the temperament is just so great, I really want to keep that. How do you balance all those things? But at least thinking through carefully and taking into account all the test results. So that's 3. Socializing the puppies responsibly, which again can mean a lot of different things, but neither leaving them to fend for themselves nor terrifying them.
Mm-hmm.
Placing them in appropriate homes, and that may involve having someone come do behavior assessments to help you figure it out, but not sending them to pet stores. But even aside from that, because that's a low bar, although we say that's a low bar, again, like, there's a large proportion of the dogs that are produced that are being placed with that level of thought, right? Just whoever comes first with money.
Yeah.
So really thoughtfully placing them in a home, being willing to take the dog back at any time, doing some level of education for the buyer, but also not but that doesn't mean being on the phone for hours at a time and hand holding them through everything, right? But being able to orient them to things like, this is a doodle, you're going to have to groom it. You're
Mm-hmm.
probably going to take it to a groomer. It's going to be expensive. If you don't do it, that's a welfare problem. It has to be done. If you're not willing to do it, don't get a doodle, right? Those
That's right.
kinds of things. or this is a lab, it has to get exercise, that
Right.
kind of right, that kind of stuff. um I really hope I didn't miss anything important. What do you guys think?
Well,
No,
I
I,
think
I
that's a
think those are
pretty good list.
all. That's a really good list, and that's a tough list to well, and I have labs, but I have um, my labs are have some confirmation and some field, so a little bit of both. So they're more calm. They're not.
They're working stuff. Yeah, yeah. Actually,
They
let me add one thing, which is being tolerant of other people's breeding practices, if those breeding practices are with the best welfare of the dogs in mind, right?
yeah.
So if you're breeding poodles, you don't have to sell your puppies to somebody who's going to cross them. But I would ask you not to report to the parent club and get someone kicked out who you observe, having their dogs used for crosses. I would ask you not to attack on Facebook someone who's
Oh
having
yeah.
their dogs used for crosses. I mean, I don't think attacking on Facebook is ever a good idea.
Yeah.
um,
There's
you
a
can
lot of
report to
that
the
happening.
parent club if dogs are like living in filth, right?
Yes. Sure.
Please report that. If dogs are being abused, please report that. Dogs being crossed to dogs of another breed by people who are doing the health testing, doing the socialization, placing the dogs in good homes, don't need to be reported and definitely do not need to be harassed on social media. So I'd
Yeah.
add that, because that's something that's also kind of surprisingly to me doesn't seem to be something that everyone understands as part of being a member of the community of good breeders.
Yes. A friend of mine. She her breed of choice is Cavaliers, and they
Mm,
have an incredible amount of health issues. And she was trying to do some, and I think she's got some support through your organization, and
mm.
but she got slammed hard on Facebook about that. And all she's trying to do is, you know,
Better
get
the breed.
healthier, breed healthier puppies, especially with the breed that has so many really, I mean, not that, trying to make it better. And she got, I mean, she kind of toughed it out and did it, did the right thing and raised those puppies very well and did all the things on your list. But still, people out there are going to, um,
Yeah.
give her a hard time because of it, right? Or they're gonna, because there's, oh, the purebred, you're not purebred. Well, the purebred for that particular breed is they have so many health issues. What's, trying to, and they have lovely temperaments, most of them. It's just the physical health is such a problem. Like some of the, like the Goldens and the Shepherds and so many of our purebred dogs. So yes, that whole judgment things. I think I'll be honest. You're it's very ambitious, and I think it's great. But getting people to buy in is
Hard.
tough. Yeah, so that's why I was like, "Oh, it'd be better." That's why I wanted to kind of bring you on and get you to kind of have people thinking about these things, because it matters. So, some of us that have the breeds that we love, it stinks when they die at 5 and 6 years old.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so it'd be nice to be able to have nice dogs for a longer time. Um, and so do you currently have people that are trying to breed, lists of these breeders are trying to do this, or is that something but that's still in the
Yeah,
works?
people ask me this question all the time. They really want a list of breeders that they can go to, and I want to give them that list, but it's not easy, right? I can't just have someone come and check a box saying, "I promise I do all the things that you want me to do."
Oh
Um,
yeah, agreed, 100%.
obviously. So we do have our 2 breeding cooperatives. They are linked off of the website. Any breeder in there, I feel comfortable about, because the heads of the breeding cooperatives vet the people coming into the breeding cooperatives very carefully. They're still small. We're trying to grow them. So they are not going to, at this point, provide all the dogs that America wants. They're not going to replace the puppy mills tomorrow. Again, I'm working on the breeder platform, and that really is meant to be a place where breeders can come upload information. This would be through a club or a registry or cooperative. Wouldn't be for individuals, but it would be a place for groups to get together, upload information about health testing and socialization practices. And the idea is that you'd be able to trust that, because I get that, we've spent all this time talking about all the things that someone needs to do to validate that a breeder's, what they want, what they expect. And it's really kind of impossible. The system's pretty broken right now. There's not a good way, not a straightforward way to go and say like, oh, okay, it's got the good puppy seal of approval, so I know it's okay.
Right.
And so that's, and there's clearly a lot of pressure to make that happen. There have been a bunch of startups trying to make it happen. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to solve that. So wish us luck. We're working on it. Yes, Tim, the functionalbreeding.org, go there, and there are links for the breeding cooperatives. And I do encourage people to get puppies from those breeders. I just don't promise that there will be a whole lot of litters on the grounds. That there may not be litter when you're looking for a puppy, or there may not be the breed that you're looking for, right?
And setting the precedent too, though, right? You're gonna pay for these puppies, not a shelter dog. They're doing health testing, they're feeding mom, they're doing all of the things, right? So this is not gonna be your $50 newspaper puppy.
It is not gonna be a $50 puppy. That is true.
Well, and just shifting the mindset of like the people who are doing this work for 4 months of their lives. It's
and more than that, right? I mean, it's not just while she's pregnant and nursing. It's also, finding the right dogs to get into your program and raising them right and evaluating them and getting all the health testing done. Like, it's years of work going to a litter. So
they definitely need to be reimbursed for sure on that.
So ahead, Jessica, one of the things because I'm obviously following, and we've talked before, or have emailed, I should say, for the puppies. You have like a Puppy Seekers project. Is that all linked to on the website, or is that a separate? I forgot how I even got on it.
It is a separate. Yes, it's separate from the Functional Dog Collaborative, but there is a link on our website to direct you to it. We tried to both support breeders and what we called puppy seekers, but realized that there was a conflict of interest there. So spun off the Puppy Seekers project. It's run by Jacqueline George. She does a great job. So you can go check that project out. I don't want to speak to it too much because it's not mine, but we do definitely support it. And so go check that out. It can be a resource for helping you sort of think through who the right breeder is for you. It is still not a list of breeders.
No.
There's just not a place where that really exists.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, it's just one of those things that, anybody can get on anybody can get on a list. It's just, trying to quantify everything. I get it. You know what I mean? That everybody's doing the same things and things like that. So it's hard to recommend when you don't know for sure. But at least if you have had some interactions, then you're right. You're not going to fill the puppies for everyone that wants one, and all that. But I think this is a great step towards those of us that want to have a normal puppy, because it's really heartbreaking when somebody comes into my business and they have a brand new puppy with a lovely little thing, and this puppy has a lot of problems. So right off the bat, you're starting with a project that people really didn't sign up for. They just wanted to get a pet, and they just wanted to get a companion, and now they have a project with all kinds of issues that they didn't really sign up for.
Yeah, it's hard on them, and it's hard on the dog. It's something we'd all like to avoid.
Is there a link to your podcast on your website as well?
Yes,
of course.
Of course there is. Yep. So those are all just.
It's all there. It's all there. It was just redesigned recently, so I'm hopeful that it should be very easy for people to find the content that they want.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, it is. It's very easy. Everything's easy to find on it. I was Wow.
And there's a contact form there, which may be how Lisa got in touch with me initially. I
Yes.
don't remember. I think it was. So if there's anything that anyone's looking for, you can go to the website, go to the contact form, and say, like, you said there'd be a podcast link here, but I can't find it. And I'll come back and be like, dummy, it's right there. So I call people dummy all the time.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
this is
challenging.
just amazing, and I know you do other things. You appear on some behavior vet stuff too, and you're just popping up everywhere. So,
Yeah.
thank you for
Well,
sharing
we-
the knowledge. You're
Yeah,
deep in
and
the.
we're and we'll be happy to support you because we're on the other end getting all these puppies that that need help and all that. So it'd be nice to not have a job, to get yourself out of a job and not. My animals are
Well,
losing
thank
their
you for what
minds.
you do as well. That is extremely important work. Nancy, you are being assaulted
Yes.
there.
Oh my God! Yes,
Hey,
my shepherd, my shepherd's like you're not. No.
no, and my border collie barks at her shepherd. So,
So it's probably time for us to wrap up. But I really appreciate the invitation and the chance to get the word out. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us. I appreciate it. All righty. Bye, all. Thank you.
Nice.